Welcome to today's panel of the Global Forum for Responsible Recruitment, Migrant Women in Spain's Agriculture, a case study of gendered recruitment policies between Morocco and Spain. My name is Kate Hooper, and I'm a policy analyst with the Migration Policy Institute, a non-partisan think tank with offices in Washington, DC and Brussels. I have the distinct pleasure of moderating this panel with three excellent speakers, Gladys Roy, Sergio Barbera, and Ángel Escriva, who I will introduce shortly. Women migrant workers are one of the four themes of this year's Global Forum for Responsible Recruitment, and this is the topic that we'll be exploring in more detail today. Today's conversation will focus on Spain and the recruitment of seasonal agricultural workers from Morocco as a case study. Foreign workers play an important role in Spain's agriculture industry. Many of these workers come from other EU member states like Romania and move under the EU's free movement rules. But Spain also recruits seasonal workers from other countries, such as Morocco, through a special system called GECO, or in English, the collective management of hiring in countries of origin. We'll hear more about how the system works and how it developed over the years shortly. But one of the interesting features to flag from the top is that there is an emphasis on hiring Moroccan women for these seasonal roles in an industry that is typically quite male-dominated. So it's an unusual feature that we'll explore in our conversation that follows. Spain's policies for recruiting seasonal workers have evolved a lot over the last 20 years. And like other countries, some challenges have emerged. In the last few years, some troubling reports have emerged that some women have experienced poor working conditions and abuse, which really illustrates the risks that migrant workers can face both during recruitment and during their period of employment. But there's also been a lot of reform and innovation, including recently announced plans to allow seasonal workers to receive 4-year visas and programming to help provide participants with training and resources that they can use when they return to Morocco. I think that this case study really will provide us with a lot of food for thought on how to safely open up employment opportunities in seasonal agriculture for women, how to mitigate some of these risks and create gender-sensitive programs, and how to promote development benefits for participating women and their local communities. And of course, the role that different actors, government, business, and civil society can play in supporting safe and regular recruitment and migration. With that, I will first turn to Gladys Roy, who is the Head of Service for Legal Affairs in Spain's Secretary of State for Migration. Gladys, the floor is yours to tell us a little bit more about Spain's program to recruit seasonal workers from Morocco and how Spain is working with the government of Morocco and other stakeholders on this issue. Turn it over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and good morning and good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Institute for Human Rights and Business for inviting me today to take part in this panel, especially for migrant women in Spain's agriculture. I brought a presentation. Let me share my screen in a second. Well, as Kate said, I'm Gladys Roy and I work at the Secretary of State for Migration, which runs the GECO program and is also the coordination of Guajira, a new pilot project on legal migration that complements an existing circular migration scheme we call GECO. GECO means collective management of hiring in origin and is a specific scheme linked to labor migration. This special scheme is aimed at hiring workers, mainly women from non-EU countries living outside Spain, to address labor shortages in certain sectors that are difficult to fill in our labor market. In particular, but not exclusively, this migratory scheme is used to bring every year thousands of seasonal agriculture female workers to several provinces of Spain. Initially, the program was born at the end of the 90s with the former denomination of contingents, and it consisted on the approval of annual quotas of foreign workers towards the coverage of permanent positions. But mind you, over the years, it has become the key and fundamental instrument on which relies both the boost and the control of the circular migration, and also the fight against irregular migration that always entails worse working conditions. For that reason, it is quite convenient to the agricultural sector that has one of the largest underskilled labor markets and to which it brings many benefits. Let's see which ones. From the workers' point of view, it makes it easy for them to take part in the selection process, as they take place in the country they live in, is free of charge and based on equal opportunities. The recruitment is done by a selection committee composed by representatives of the Spanish administration, local authorities, ANAPEC in the case of Morocco, and also the employers. During the selection process, emphasis is put in explaining the contract and labor conditions to the candidates, so it is a quite fair recruitment. Those participants who meet all the requirements, including return once the contract is over, will have preference to participate the following year. They are automatically preselected. And those who have participated in HECO for more than twice are exempt from the labor market test, which gives them more chances to be employed in Spain under other migratory schemes and not only through HECO. The work and residence permit are issued on time and match the duration of the contract, thus ensuring a decent salary for all their stay, improving their quality of life and that of their families, as well as providing wealth to the communities of origin and destination through remittances. Wage and working conditions comply with the regulations and collective bargaining in force. And important is that those employers not complying with these conditions shall be banned from the program at least 3 years. Moreover, the employers pay for the travel arrangements for the workers, and decent housing is provided for in accordance with the standard and regularly verified living conditions. Now, from the employer point of view, it guarantees the availability of suitable labor force thanks to the arrival of the seasonal workers at the perfect timing. It provides stability in harvest time. For the employers, it is also important the climate of trust that is built between them and their employees when they express their intention to return and participate in the next season, and so they do, year after year. Some of these women have been participating in HECO for more than a decade. And moreover, these hiring and origin schemes relies on a swift administrative procedure that coordinates all actors involved, Moroccan and Spanish, with a high degree of cooperation. Finally, from an institutional standpoint, the program is an exponent of the successful cooperation and organization of legal migratory pathways with the country of origin, which in this case is Morocco. This cooperation happens, for instance, during the recruitment process that takes place in the country of origin by a selection committee, as I said, in which both countries are present, also through the permit and visa procedures that are fast-tracked, and also once the contract is over by overseeing the return process. As protection of workers is key, especially regarding migrant workers, the Labor Inspectorate pays visits every farm every year, and the presence of civil society organizations and the IOM, the International Organization for Migration, is also key to identify and fix any incident or misconduct that may occur. All in all, HECO has become a triple win, as we like to say, for the three parties involved, the country of origin, the country of destination, and the migrant. So, all in all, we have this incredibly successful circular migration scheme that brings every year thousands of Moroccan women to Spain, and still we wanted to make it better, but how? By offering them a sustainable reintegration option. According to ANAPEC, which is our partner in HECO, and also to recent studies by the IOM, many or most of the women participating in HECO don't have an employment or an income-generating activity while in Morocco. Thus, they and their entire households live on the wages earned by them while in Spain. Although some of them get a temporary job, 95% don't perceive the minimum wage in Morocco, what makes them belong to the most vulnerable group in the country. They are women, poor, rural, and low-skilled. They are fully dependent on migration. For them, it's no longer an option, it's just a need. However, ANAPEC identified that many of them had something else in common. They had dreams of becoming financially independent, of becoming entrepreneurs. Only they didn't have the necessary skills nor the seed funding. There, we had it crystal clear. We had to offer these women training and access to credit, and that's what Wafira is here for. Wafira in Arab means abundance. Abundance of skills, of means, of opportunities. And Wafira is also the acronym of Women as Financially Independent Rural Actors. Financed by the European Union, contracted by the ICMPD through the Migration Partnership Facility, Wafira is a pilot project on legal migration between Spain and Morocco, whose objective is maximizing the development impact of circular migration and mobility. On the one hand, Wafira will train and support 250 women participating in HECO for sustainable socio-economic reintegration in their communities of origin. And on the other hand, Wafira will strengthen Moroccan institutions to provide financial and non-financial business development services to migrant workers towards their reintegration into the Moroccan labor market. And as this is about work and entrepreneurship, both the private sector and the International Labour Organization participate in the project as our implementing partners. Wafira started this year in 2022 with a group of 50 women that were selected and trained in entrepreneurship, both in Morocco and Spain, in parallel to their jobs, 1 afternoon per week in their mother tongue, which is Darija, Arab Darija, and in a very practical way, as most of them are illiterate. Upon return, the reintegration phase includes a funding mechanism to support the launching of the women-led businesses and mentoring and support to the women during the whole process. Will this model succeed to become part of HECO or a complement to it? Will the access to credit and business support and mentoring be enough to make this initiative sustainable and to turn these women into entrepreneurs? Well, only time will tell. And then meanwhile, you can follow Wafira on social media and on its website, and soon you will know. And thank you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Gladys, for that overview, both of the GECO program and also of the Wafira project. It's very interesting to hear more about your work. I'll turn the floor over next to Sergio Barbera from Conexión Social. Sergio, the floor is yours to tell us a little bit more about the history of the program and how it's evolved over the years.
Thank you very much, Kate, and also thank you very much to the Institute for the invitation. And really interesting, Gladys, your presentation. I'm going to go back around 20 years in the past when we started with the Aeneas Cartaya initiative, with all this process with the Moroccan women, especially. But I say that it would have been a great idea to have an initiative like Wafira, because you will see at the end of the presentation that this is one of my conclusions. That it would have been very useful to have this kind of initiative and steps inside the program. So going back to my presentation, the ethical management of labor migration flows was the name of a project, an initiative that was inside the European Europe Aid program that was called Aeneas in a municipality in Huelva that is called Cartaya. In 2004, there were like 18,000 inhabitants in this town. So I'm going to go over very quickly on recruitment in origin or guest workers programs as a solution. What is it? Historical evolution procedure, really fast, because I think it has been already explained. European migration policies, the Aeneas program, 2 slides only, and then I would go into dive into the Aeneas Cartaya initiative and what was it, okay? So the labor-linked migration, well, in the early 20s in Spain, there was a number of foreign countries, and you can see in the agriculture, in 2004, we had 15% of contracts in the agriculture, but it was really relevant that in the increase from 2004 to 2005 was 24% in terms of contracts. So it was really interesting that in the first semester of 2005, 15% of the contracts made in Spain were made to foreign people. What was happening in Spain, you can imagine it was economic boom at that moment. There was a lot of demand, especially in the construction sector, in the services sector, and also in the agriculture. So what we had is in the first 6 months of 2025, 236,000 Moroccan and 186 Ecuadorian workers were hired. Both added 34% of total contracts in that period. Men 67%, women 33%. Those were in the first semester of 2005. You can see here very quickly, Moroccan migrant workers. These were only outside the European Union, because you can imagine that we have a lot of British and German and also Italian people living in Spain. So just outside from the European Union in those dates, when Romania, Poland were not in the European Union, you can see Morocco as the first country in terms of workers or migrants coming to Spain, living in Spain, and then some Latin American countries. And then you can see in fourth place, Romania, that right now is the second one, really along with Morocco, the two countries with both migrant workers in Spain nowadays. So I'm going to go over the Huelva historical evolution. From 1994 to 1997, workers were needed, and those that were going for the season to harvest the berries and citrus also, mostly were from neighboring provinces like Cádiz or Sevilla. There were some policies provided to them, public policies providing housing and scholarships offered for their children during the season. 1997 to 1999, it began the switch from this national workforce by migrants. They still came, the people from Cádiz and Sevilla, but there were some other people coming from the Maghreb and Eastern Europe. Some issues started to happen with the housing, and especially in some situations there were some even episodes of racism and situations. There was a pull factor also in terms of there is job here, you can come here, and there was a mismatch in production and required labor demand. From 1999 and 2001, that pull factor that had brought a lot of people with no work permit made the government take some decisions, and the first regularization, massive regularizations process happened. There were around 6 or 7 regularizations in Spain. I think it was the 7th one was in 2005, and there was an increase in the replacement of local labor by migrant one. From 2002 to 24, it appeared the contingent in origin, but the first migrant workers that were hired as guest workers using the contingent that Gladys explained before came from Eastern countries. In those dates were Poland and Romania, that still were not inside the European Union. And there was the general approach and certain social effects of this movement of workers. Most of them were women already. Okay, the guest workers programs as a valid solution. Okay, in 2004, the migration regulation was published, that was agreed by the government, and offered 4 legal immigration pathways for migrant workers. Hiring at origin for stable jobs through a document that was called the Catalog of Occupations that are difficult to cover, those professions that were difficult to find in Spain, and if found outside Spain, the worker could come to Spain and stay in Spain using this, developing this job, if the job was inside this catalog. Okay, hiring at origin for seasonal jobs, guest workers programs, for which only a temporary stay with an obligation to return to the country of origin is allowed. That this was the solution that was taken here. And then there were a couple of different additional cases or pathways, job search visas in the sector of activity that are defined in this regard, and at that time only for domestic staff, and also job search visas for children or grandchildren of Spaniards that migrated in the past and had the possibility or the chance to come back to Spain. These were the 4 paths, and the hiring at origin or contracting in origin or guest workers programs was the one chosen. Well, Gladys explained very well the contracting in origin system. And one of the keys was that the worker must return to his or her country at the end of the contract. With this returning, they gain the right to come back to the country with no further selection, okay? And really important that after the fourth return, so in the fifth year, they can apply for a resident and work permit in Spain if they wish to do so, okay? So they gain also the right to stay and to have the Spanish residence, and that was the idea in the origin of this project, okay? The special status for seasonal workers, okay, in the organic law on immigration, stated that the public administration should promote the assistance and all the social services for workers. Job offers should be done or should be addressed to those countries that had agreements with Spain. Okay, there should be an active participation of all kind of levels in the administration, including city councils and regional governments, and the accommodation should be guaranteed in the conditions of dignity and adequate hygiene. All this was inside this law. Okay, the temporary residence and work stated that they could be here working a maximum limit of 9 months per year. And as I said, accommodation should be provided, and also, as Gladys explained, the trips to Spain and return should be paid by the employer. Okay, at least all the cost in the trip to Spain. Okay, and regarding the condition of returning, when they went back to their country, they would have 1 month to go to usually the consulate and stamp that they had complied with the condition of return. This was changed in the time. The procedure was changed in the time. So when the contingent was going back, this stamping in their passport of the returning condition was done in the border. So it was easier for workers not having to go to the consulate, etc. But at the beginning, it was that way. They had to go to a consulate in Spain, in Morocco, and say, hey, I'm here, I'm back, I'm complying with my condition. Next year, I would like to go to Spain again to work, if they wish, obviously. These were the countries that the first years Spain had signed contracts for regulation of migration flows: Bulgaria, Colombia, Ecuador, Morocco, Poland, Dominican Republic, and Romania. Okay, okay. These were the data in this program. In 2,600 guest workers were hired. 2001, 7,000, 2002, 12,000. So the project started growing. 2003, 21,000, and there were some Moroccan workers there. 2004, 23,000. Also, there were some Moroccan, but most of them were from Eastern countries, so Romania and Poland in those moments, but they were not in the European Union. Later, in 2007, almost when those countries, they were already in the European Union, but there was still contracts in origin with those countries, 33,000. And in 2008, when the workers from Poland and Romania could come to Spain, let's say, freely with no problem, because they were in the European Union, and with the Schengen Treaty, they can move from any country to any country in the European Union. There were 40,000 workers contracted in origin, most of them in this case from Morocco. Okay, in 2009, 14, almost all Moroccan after Romania entered the European Union. 14,000, all of them, almost all of them were from Morocco. Okay, the European migration policies, the AENEAS program. The AENEAS program was a project or initiative from the Europe Aid, 4 years, 2004 to 2008. It was an assistance program for third countries in the fields of migration and asylum, with 5 lines: readmission, asylum, and protection of people. And we focused with the head of the project Cartaya. We were the assistants, the technical assistants to this project in the three last lines: development of legal migration, migration management, and fighting against illegal immigration. Aeneas, in the first year, there were 26 projects granted, more than 30 million euros allocated, 10 projects with the participation of Morocco. Only 3 of them were Spanish, and the Aeneas Cartaya in Huelva, a small town, was one of them. Okay, so it was really a success for the Cartaya municipality. The interesting part here, in my opinion, one of the interesting parts, was how there was a lot of actors, and this is one of the great successes that were involved, okay? From the head, that was the Cartaya municipality, through different unions like CCOO, one of the main unions in Spain, NGOs, in this case, for example, the Federación Andalucía Acoge, and the different partners. Obviously, a local partner that was ANAPEC, same that Gladys has mentioned before. It was the labor office in department in Morocco, and a couple of authorities supporting, one from the central government in Spain, the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, through the Secretary of State for Immigration and Emigration, that was the name then, and the Andalusia regional government from the Junta Andalucía through the Department of Migration Policy. So we had almost all there, plus other actors, really important, obviously growers associations that were there involved, obviously other unions, and a very important actor that was the Association of Support to Temporary Workers, that was made of some companies in the area, plus the municipality. All these different actors created 5 different commissions or working groups, and each one was facing different topics. For example, the Comisión Onubense de Municipios con Inmigración, it was made of different growers associations, plus the municipality, plus the government, talking about the general flows and how all this was organized. Comisión de Ordenación de Flujos Migratorios included the national government, and also it was a place where some of the complaints or the situations could be managed. The Comisión de Coordinación de las Juntas de Seguridad, that involved security, so the police, the Guardia Civil, plus municipalities also in the province, okay? The Mesa Provincial de la Inmigración, that was where the NGOs were coordinated and the social issues were treated there and solved there. And then, as I said, the Association of Support to Temporary Workers. So all these committees, all these working groups were put in place and were coordinated. So that was really important. So it was clear how many workers were coming, when they were coming, what were the issues, where was the where was the necessary resources to be needed, etc., etc. Okay. Different objectives of the project. I will be very fast here. Develop the legal migration of workers by developing the guest workers program with Morocco. To this end, the transnational data collection, processing, and exchange system was established to facilitate the process. So we helped, or we collaborated with the Moroccan government to develop itself, okay? And applying as a second objective a comprehensive management system to the labor migration flows that has to do with many of the things that Gladys has commented in terms of providing housing, providing transport to workers, providing information, providing a good recruitment process, and always based on corporate social responsibility principles. The third one, prevent illegal immigration to Huelva, including workers and growers, in a comprehensive management system, protecting workers and giving the message that this was a good way to come, work here, go back, come, work here, and at the end, if you wish to stay here, you can stay here. If you wish to live in your country, you can live there. As Gladys has said, there are thousands of women that have been coming from those days till today, okay? Every single year, as by the way we do, for example, when we go to harvest grapes in France, okay? Guarantee the fulfillment of the contracts by the workers and the return to Morocco. That was really important and was one of the keys. and I tell you later why. Okay, which were the expected results that this was the first one. Adapt the number of legal migrant workers to the current needs of the province of Huelva. There was a lack of workers, and the idea was to adapt the offer to the demand. Okay, ensure a professional selection as established in the political agreement of manpower. Promote and encourage hiring at origin and guarantee the safe return of seasonal workers, and develop a documented management system for guest workers. Those were all expected results. Assisting workers on their trip and guarantee decent accommodation, improving the integration and employment situation of migrant workers, and improving the possibilities of communication with their respective families, as well as access to training and leisure services in their place of origin. We also had some activities and actions developed in Morocco. Okay, these were some of the tools that were created. The temporary workers office, I think this is one of the clear keys here. It was an office open in Cartaya, in the municipality, to provide support to workers. Any single worker that had any doubt, any need, papers, documents, social services, information, could go there and get information there and issues solved. Obviously, people spoke Arabic and other languages, because it was not only for Moroccan workers. Okay, a labor integration office, the adult training center, a nursery for mothers if they had children and needed to leave them when they were going to work, the refugee housing for situations that needed this, also the residential area Casa del Gato, a huge housing complex with a lot of services that was built there, and accommodation in farms. That was one of the things that remain and still remain. Some collective residences for temporary workers. For example, the Tariquejo residence was designed for 200 places. Right now, 750 workers come every year to this residence, and still is working, and it's working well. And then,
Sergio,
yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we are running a little bit short on time because Ángel has to leave in 15. So if you could just spend 1 or 2 minutes wrapping up, I just want to make sure that Ángel has enough time to present and we can do a question. Thank you, and sorry for interrupting.
No problem. No problem. I will go really fast into the last, into my last steps, my last slides. Here there is a presentation. There's a nice slides where you can check what were the results, etc. But my final comments: in 2011, after the end of the project and the government decision to take and to finish increasing the number of workers, there was a stop of all these actions that were really giving security and safety to workers and running a good system that was working well. And this needed to be restarted several years after. There were an increase in vulnerabilities. There was lack of leadership from the Spanish public administration, new growers into the program, no experience in the system, extended issues, wrong workers profiles at the farms, workers less protected, increase in abuses, workers documents retentions, communication barriers. All these issues were there. And why? Because mediators that were one of the key priorities before 2011 were not there to help workers. Okay, so there was a fail in the system because the system disappeared after 2011, when only repeaters, so workers that repeat every year, don't need too much because they knew Spain, they knew the system, they knew everything. And there were some solutions created, but not really enough. Okay, so these were some of the lessons learned. And I could continue with this, but very interesting and very important to train and build trust in the system for workers, managing well the exceptions, keeping a lot of information provided, understand deeply each actor's interest, train recruitment teams, be able to understand where the gaps are starting to grow, keep the improvements over the gaps of the law system. For example, some issues that have been corrected in the last years, and I think they are good improvements to the system. And finally, a worker profile definition. Just a small comment. When we defined the worker profile definition in 2004, we started the first year with anything. So it was men coming from Casablanca. It was a really disaster. Only 5% of the workers returned. So we changed the profile into women from rural areas. Okay, and the definition of women was women with proper age for the job to perform. That was how it was defined. It may not sound really non-discriminated, but I think it was a good decision in terms of the results of the project. Okay, reasons for compliance with returning conditions, etc., etc. We missed to perform, and this is why I think WAFIRA would have been very interesting, a complete and neutral impact evaluation over the thousands of guest workers and on their communities of the initiative. What was the impact on local growers and on their communities? What were their personal situations? Those women were empowered. Do they own their business? Do they have their own lives, you know? And their families were increased resources. I can tell you that this has been analyzed in a personal way. I know a lot of cases of people that have sent their children to school, to university, because they had this kind of income. They have taken the government of their own lives, and those positive impacts were there. But we never measured this impact, and we only took other information that were not that positive. So I think that we need in the future, if we do another project like this, to be clear on what is this evaluation long-term that we didn't do. That's my final comment, and thank you very much. Sorry for being so long.
Thank you so much, Sergio. That was a really fascinating overview of how the program evolved, and I really appreciated your thoughtful comments on the end on, you know, what different actors can do better and lessons for the future. I will now turn the floor over to Ángel Escriva, who is an associate professor at the University of Huelva in Spain. And she's also an activist with Mujeres 24H, which advocates for women's rights in agriculture and domestic work. Sergio, if you could stop sharing your screen so Ángel can pull up her slides, and then the floor will be hers. Thank you.
Hola, mi nombre es Ángeles Escriva. Soy profesora de Sociología en la Universidad de Huelva y activista en el colectivo Mujeres 24 Horas de Huelva. En esta fotografía que pueden ver ustedes, estamos concentradas un grupo de mujeres del colectivo Mujeres 24 Horas con trabajadoras del campo marroquíes durante el confinamiento en 2020. Es interesante tener en cuenta que estas mujeres protestaban por las condiciones de trabajo que estaban sufriendo durante el COVID, pero además por la dificultad para poder regresar a su país, y que producto de esta protesta que ellas protagonizaron, en la que nosotras les pudimos acompañar, pues ninguna de ellas, a nuestro conocimiento, ha podido regresar a las siguientes temporadas, a las siguientes campañas. Esto nos da una imagen de que las mujeres jornaleras que vienen en la contratación en origen, pues son mujeres que están sujetas a unas condiciones estrictas. El programa GECO de gestión colectiva de la contratación en origen, del que se ha hablado aquí, pues se presenta globalmente como un programa modélico de gestión de la llamada migración circular, con todas las bondades que ya se han mencionado, pero desde nuestro punto de vista resulta en efecto pues un marco que, aunque aparentemente aporta una imagen de orden en las relaciones laborales dentro del sector agrícola, dando una serie de obligaciones y derechos a las distintas partes, pues principalmente lo que este programa está consiguiendo es espantar un poco ese miedo que tenemos en nuestras sociedades a la idea de la invasión de personas de fuera, sospechosas siempre de ser ilegales y desautorizadas de otra manera a viajar o a permanecer allá donde quieran. Como analistas, nosotras, estudiosas y activistas de esta realidad social en una perspectiva sistémica y crítica, somos feministas pro derechos humanos y por la justicia social, pues nos preocupa este tipo de presentaciones que tanto los estados como las asociaciones empresariales y otras entidades que participan en estos foros, pues este tipo de presentaciones triunfalistas, donde la contratación en origen, el modelo de gestión de la llamada migración circular, es presentado como un éxito, no solamente económico, sino también un éxito social, utilizando pues, conceptos como el de codesarrollo o de win-win, ganancia para todos, modelo a replicar, sin muchas veces realizar una profunda reflexión sobre la base de en qué se sustentan estos modelos y las consecuencias que acarrean. Y yo quiero plantear aquí ante ustedes dos cuestiones. Bueno, pues en primer lugar, el hecho que muchos analistas, hay un número de investigaciones y reportes incluso de Naciones Unidas y otros organismos internacionales que dan fe de ello, pues, y otros actores en el terreno, que un programa de reclutamiento de trabajadores dirigido a segmentos de población que representan aquellos grupos sociales más vulnerables, en este caso mujeres de entornos rurales, con dificultades lectoras y de escritura, sin dominio de otros idiomas, con hijos menores a su cargo, generalmente sin cobertura de una pareja, de un padre que está ausente porque son viudas, divorciadas, con maridos enfermos, desempleados, pues son efectivamente el perfil idóneo para que estas personas caigan en todo tipo de explotación y abusos, que ocurren no solamente durante su estancia en España, sino antes y después en Marruecos. Como decías, todos estos trabajos avalados internacionalmente y realizados por distintos organismos y también muchos medios de comunicación independientes, incluso auditorías de derechos humanos que han sido encomendadas por grandes empresas, pues constatan que año tras año los bajos salarios que las mujeres ganan en el campo, a estos salarios se les va detrayendo de una manera u otra cantidades en base a pagos que tienen que hacer por esto y por lo otro. Por ejemplo, en la intermediación que sucede en Marruecos para obtener el visado y el compromiso de contrato para sus certificados médicos, contraen deudas en Marruecos antes de venir a España por dejar a los hijos a cargo de otras personas, gastos de viaje, que no son solamente el barco, que es aquello de lo que se hace cargo el empresario, pero además cuando llegan a España tienen que pagar por la vivienda, los suministros, agua, luz, la movilidad del campo a los pueblos, porque viven en fincas agrícolas aisladas. Tienen que pagarse su propia comida, sus enseres a precios muchas veces el doble o el triple de cualquier tienda de un pueblo, porque se los tienen que hacer llegar a las zonas aisladas donde viven. Todos estos elementos y muchos otros que deberían de ser facilitados por los propios empresarios o incluso servicios que se tendrían que prestar por el Estado, que para eso hay unas contribuciones sociales que se abonan por cada trabajador. En cambio, tienen que ser sufragadas con los míseros, digamos, salarios que reciben estas mujeres, contribuyendo a toda una economía de casi país tercermundista en torno a las jornaleras contratadas en origen. Hay que tener en cuenta, además, dentro de esos servicios del Estado que no son suficientemente cubiertos, la falta, no hay ni para empezar con el número de intérpretes árabe-español que se ponen a disposición durante las campañas, ni del personal sanitario o trabajadores sociales que no dependan de las empresas y que son necesarias para atender las necesidades de estas personas en los distintos pueblos de la provincia. Sabemos que durante la estación turística del verano, pues se aumentan los servicios públicos sanitarios, por ejemplo, para la población vacacional. Sin embargo, durante los 6 meses de campaña agrícola, los servicios sanitarios prácticamente son los mismos. El segundo aspecto que quería recalcar es, si por un lado la vulnerabilidad del propio colectivo que se contrata en origen y las deficiencias o las faltas, carencias de servicios, y por el contrario el detraimiento de dinero de los ingresos que reciben. Por otro lado, no menos importante, habría que recalcar la falta de cumplimiento de lo establecido en las normas que regulan la contratación en origen, tanto por lo que respecta a la orden GECO, que es de nivel nacional, como por lo establecido en el Convenio del Campo en Huelva, que está sin renovar porque la patronal del campo se opone, el Estatuto de los Trabajadores y otras normas vinculantes. Y es de lamentar que a pesar de los años transcurridos, llevamos más de 15 años de implementación de la orden GECO, sigue habiendo mucha mano de obra y mucha mano abierta a los abusos que se producen en el campo por parte del empresariado agrícola. Este empresariado se siente totalmente impune porque las inspecciones laborales son pocas y las multas de muy baja cuantía. A las trabajadoras se les aplica lo que llamamos el régimen jornalero, es decir, que cuando el empresario no quiere, no trabajan. Hay que entender que son personas que se las ha traído de cientos y a veces miles de kilómetros, y una vez aquí, ya residiendo en la finca donde trabajan y viven, pues están a merced de la voluntad de los empleadores. Si por cuestión de clima, por cuestión de los precios del mercado o porque no obedecen o no se prestan a lo que sea, pues estas mujeres pueden ser castigadas con días sin trabajar, incluso con el despido, incluso al poco de haber llegado a España. Y esto las lleva directamente a la calle, sin ingresos. Y es importante recalcar que un modelo de ordenación de las relaciones laborales agrícolas que pretende formalizar todo el sistema y regularizarlo acaba convirtiendo, debido al fraude en las normas de trabajo, a la irregularidad y a pasar a estar indocumentadas en España. Digo que el empresario se siente impune porque ni las autoridades de orden político ni económicas, ni incluso las policiales y judiciales, actúan de oficio ni investigan, a menos que hayan denuncias. Solamente las denuncias más alarmantes, las que han tenido repercusión en los medios de comunicación, han llevado a algunos de estos casos a los tribunales. Pero hay que tener en cuenta que los medios de comunicación dependen mucho de las empresas de la región para su supervivencia. Por tanto, no publican nada que pueda perjudicar a sus patrocinadores. Y las propias trabajadoras tampoco denuncian. Anteriormente se comentaba de que sin tan mal está la cosa, como es que estas mujeres repiten año tras año. Evidentemente hay una necesidad de ganar ingresos. Y estas mujeres pues no denuncian porque han asumido este rol de mano de obra subalterna, que lo suyo es un sacrificio que tienen que realizar por poder tener acceso ellas y sus familias a algo más, digamos en este festín que se les ofrece desde más al norte. Y además no denuncian y no reclaman porque saben que tienen todas las de perder. porque los casos en los juzgados no prosperan, y por la vergüenza que visibilizarse, exponerse públicamente comporta. Arriesgan no solamente su integridad física, moral, sino también el honor, algo muy importante en sus culturas, el honor personal y de sus familias. Y todo ello, pues lamentablemente, contribuye a esta gran impostura, aparentar, hacer declaraciones grandilocuentes de lo bien que se lleva todo, cuando todo el mundo sabe. Yo como profesora en mis aulas siempre intento traer este tema a colación con mis estudiantes. Todos ellos tienen experiencias propias o de allegados, de familiares que trabajan o han trabajado en el campo, y todos ellos confirman, la gente de la calle, en los pueblos, que se maltrata a los trabajadores del campo, que hay una violencia física, verbal, y por eso la población local evita estos empleos, que son duros física y psicológicamente, mal pagados. Los peores puestos dentro del ranking o jerarquía de trabajos en el campo son para los miserables del sur. Y todo el mundo asume que las cosas son así, que para que unos cuantos prosperen y supuestamente se contribuya a la rueda del negocio capitalista de la agricultura intensiva, que algunas migajas va a dejar para el resto, pues la ciudadanía calla o peor aún, asiente. Y, en fin, por intentar ser constructivos, voy a dejar aquí en 3 diapositivas donde aportamos algunas propuestas de cosas que de medidas que se tendrían que llevar a cabo. Reforzar las inspecciones laborales y otros controles con la garantía del íntegro cumplimiento de los contratos de trabajo. No se puede, insisto, plantear un sistema que recluta personas de otros países y luego no asegura que van a tener trabajo constantemente, que van a tener una carga de trabajo suficiente y constante, a riesgo de quedarse sin ingresos o de finalmente tener unos ingresos muy, muy bajos que no valga la pena el haber hecho este esfuerzo. Que se cobre las jornadas laborales según convenio, con todas las prestaciones. Controlar las condiciones de vida y trabajo en las fincas agrícolas, incluidas las condiciones climáticas y ambientales. Reforzar las figuras de la intermediación social sociolaboral y lingüística, y además estas tienen que ser independientes de los empresarios, porque si no, lo que nosotros vemos sobre el terreno es que las mediadoras tienden a ponerse del lado de los empresarios. Muy importante también es el refuerzo de las políticas y las prestaciones que aplican a las temporeras agrícolas. Si estas trabajadoras lo son de pleno derecho, porque hay unas leyes tanto a nivel español como europeo que protegen a los trabajadores de los llamados terceros países, en la medida que se garantiza que disfrutan de los mismos derechos y obligaciones que los trabajadores nacionales de la Unión Europea, pues tienen que poder acumular años, meses y años de tiempo trabajado para una pensión, poder recibir una baja o una pensión por enfermedad, si es transitoria o permanente, o incapacidades. Poner de verdad mecanismos claros y expeditivos rápidos de reparación a las temporeras. Tenemos ya varias generaciones de mujeres temporeras que, a causa de las pésimas condiciones de trabajo, trabajos muy duros y con pocos descansos, sino ninguno, y sin posibilidad de controles médicos suficientes. Bueno, todas estas mujeres que han sufrido estas violaciones de derechos, que son sistemáticas, impunes, se les debería de poder reparar. que estos derechos los puedan disfrutar tanto si están en España como si regresan temporal o permanentemente a Marruecos. Que puedan tener espacios de protección. Y no menos importante, mecanismos que permitan aliviar el impacto negativo de una actividad como es la agrícola, una actividad productiva variable que está expuesta a muchas incertidumbres y la dureza de las condiciones de vida y trabajo. Estas variables, estos factores son tenidos en cuenta en relación con la población agrícola local, por ejemplo, a través de subsidios que se les ofrecen a los españoles que trabajan en el campo, de manera que cuando por las condiciones climáticas del mercado, etcétera, no hay empleo en el campo, estas personas reciben un subsidio para poder subsistir. Esto mismo no se hace con las trabajadoras contratadas en origen. Se las puede despedir en cualquier momento, incluso sin haber cubierto el periodo de contrato que se prometió, que se convino en el país de origen, y sin ningún tipo de indemnización se les obliga a regresar a su casa. Entonces se tendrían que suscribir seguros, si es que la patronal no puede asegurar un trabajo continuado para estas trabajadoras, tendrían que haber seguros de índole público-privada que las pudiera indemnizar por la pérdida de jornadas de trabajo. También propiciar condiciones saludables. Hay mucho que hacer con la sustitución de productos tóxicos que son utilizados de manera general en las labores, las rutinas del campo, reducir la intensidad de las jornadas, introduciendo más maquinaria y utensilios, y que ya que ellas viven justo allá donde trabajan día a día, que esa agua y esos alimentos que ingieren que sean de calidad y en abundancia, porque hemos encontrado que esto no es así. Muchas de las enfermedades que las aquejan, que son muchas, vienen producto ya no solamente de las condiciones de trabajo, sino de vida que padecen. Erradicar, claro, cómo no, desde nuestra perspectiva feminista, erradicar esa violencia estructural que se vive en el campo, pues es a través de la amenaza de la violencia física y sexual hacia las mujeres, algunas veces una amenaza que se cumple, cómo se consigue que se supediten totalmente a la voluntad de los supervisores. Poner a disposición de todas estas trabajadoras medios de comunicación, de transporte gratuitos o de bajo coste, para que no se sigan aprovechando de ellas, pues toda esta economía paralela que se ha creado en su entorno, para que no sufran de inseguridad, de miedo a sufrir violencia física, verbal, sexual por parte de estas personas que les ofrecen transporte, les ofrece llevarlas en sus coches particulares. Eliminar listas de productividad y el chantaje y castigo como modo de obtener consentimiento, como modo de disciplinar a las trabajadoras. Es decir, si no cubres una serie de kilos de recogida de tal fruta, pues eres castigada, mañana no trabajas. O otro tipo de chantajes todavía más denigrantes. Permitir el acceso a las fincas agrícolas de los agentes sociales, no solamente de los agentes que están más comprometidos con los empresarios, lamentablemente, en el sentido de que dependen más de ellos, dependen de sus decisiones, sino también otros agentes sociales más independientes, que no dependen de las subvenciones y de los contratos que realizan con los empresarios. Porque realmente, si no, no estamos hablando de un tercer sector vigilante. Y hay una falta de transparencia, un oscurantismo, tanto por parte del Estado como, por supuesto, de las empresas, sobre el estado contable, sobre las nóminas, lo que cobran, las horas extras, si las pagan como debieran, sobre las condiciones de la producción y el estado de sus trabajadoras. Es necesario, fundamental, si se quiere realmente progresar en la línea de la llamada debida diligencia, que las empresas se comprometan a abrir sus puertas y abrir sus libros contables, sus programas. En resumen, autoridades más vigilantes, todos cumplir y hacer cumplir la ley, mejorar esas leyes, que se suscriban esos seguros y se soliciten las compensaciones que he mencionado, porque las mujeres contratadas en origen con todas las garantías deben de ser tratadas también igual que cualquier otro trabajador, trabajadora nacional o dentro de la Unión Europea. Muy importante, dejar no solamente el victimismo, que lo que yo he intentado hacer aquí no es un victimismo, sino es un realismo total y absoluto, y por eso me interesa recalcar este punto, sino también un cierto patronazgo, es decir, o paternalismo, la sensación de que las mujeres se les tiene que decir qué hacer y cómo. Bueno, pues realmente lo que nosotros hemos comprobado en nuestro trabajo en el terreno es que ellas tienen la capacidad también para autoorganizarse y lo que llamamos empoderarse. Y de esa manera se consiguen, hay distintas fórmulas que consiguen darles mayor visibilidad, a la vez que cuestionando el sistema y el funcionamiento. Programas como el programa que se ha mencionado anteriormente, el de UAFIRA, no tiene mucho sentido si anteriormente no se les está respetando todos los derechos, se les está pagando justamente, se está evitando la violencia de todo tipo, tanto en Marruecos como aquí, ¿no? Digamos, en ese ir y volver. O sea, el apoyo al emprendimiento a través de una serie de actividades es como realmente, así lo veo y así lo quiero expresar, es una pequeña burla a lo que es realmente el gran problema del sistema y del modelo. Hay que entrar en los temas de raíz, solucionar los problemas en su raíz y dejar que sean las personas empoderadas las que ellas vayan determinando, autoorganizándose cómo quieren emplear su dinero. Si es para mejorar las condiciones de vida de sus familias, que tengan acceso a sus estudios, a esa sanidad que es tan cara o inaccesible en un país como Marruecos, o si es para poner un negocio. No consideramos que ambientalmente ni socialmente es sostenible el régimen de cultivo intensivo de la tierra y del agua, utilizando intensivamente la tierra, el agua, la química de síntesis y una mano de obra considerada de facto de tercera clase. Por tanto, nos resulta muy difícil hablar de buenas prácticas. Hay algunos casos aislados que se repiten constantemente, porque son tan pocos que aparecen en todos los informes, en todos los medios de comunicación de algunas empresas de la zona que practican algunas mejoras, pero el cumplimiento 100% de lo que establece en la ley, yo les garantizo que no se produce. No hay ni una sola empresa que cumpla 100% lo que dice la normativa de la orden GECO y las otras normativas vinculantes. Por tanto, vamos a transitar en ese camino y cuando eso esté resuelto vamos entonces a plantear de qué manera podemos trabajar en ese llamado codesarrollo de nuestras sociedades y de las personas, de los hombres y mujeres que vivimos en este planeta. Muchas gracias.
So I'll now turn to a couple of questions now that we've heard your presentations about Spain's policies for the audience. I think my first question is the role that different actors can play in addressing some of the challenges that migrant women workers can face and to maximise the benefits that they can reap from this type of employment. So perhaps I can turn first to Gladys to share a little bit about what the government can really do in terms of working with other stakeholders and coordinating across government to address some of the challenges that can emerge in these types of recruitment programs. And as you alluded to, sort of think creatively about ways to maximize the benefits.
Yeah, in fact, thanks for the question. Yeah, I think in fact it's a question of responsibility and of paying back all what these women have been doing for Spain and for the agriculture sector in Spain all these past years. But it's not only the government of Spain that wants to do something, also the government of Morocco wanted to. I think it's in everybody's sake that these programs do work, because, as I said, they are a triple win. They are a win for both the countries of origin and destination and for the migrant themselves. So there's always something else to do, of course, but I think initiatives like Wafida that tries to make the most positive impact of these programs, that's the way we should move forward, protecting and empowering these women so they have all the tools they need to make the most of this experience, because it's a life experience for them as well, and then to go back to their countries and make the most of what they have learned, of what they have earned as well, and of all the tools they have acquired during all this time. So I think it's a team job.
Thank you. And Sergio, perhaps you could speak a little bit about the role that businesses can play, both in tackling some of the challenges that you alluded to during your presentation, but also in terms of that question of how to maximize the benefits for women who do participate in this type of recruitment and employment.
Oh, thank you for the question. Yes, well, obviously, when a worker repeats year after year with the same grower, there are links that are built there, and at the end of this relationship, these links provide the chance for this person to be helped by this grower if they wish to stay or to remain in Spain. So at the end, this is something natural that ends happening. In the other hand, when new growers, as I said, start with this process, it's very important to understand, especially for new workers, what are their fears, what are their concerns, and it's really important to get trained, understand how to use the resources that are available for them, use those resources, and provide these workers with the support that they need. In some occasions, they just need someone that speaks their language and tries to communicate with the grower. We talk about small growers that may not have someone speaking the same language than those workers in the farm. So in these cases, it's really important for them to understand which are the fears, which are the concerns, and what are the resources that are there available for them, so they provide this support to these workers. Okay. When we talk about bigger farms, we see really very nice examples of how growers provide leisure or services for workers throughout the years, increasing those relationships. Some of them related with other migrant workers, and I know plenty of examples of activities that are done inside the farms in terms of making the national day of this country or making the national day of that country, and then cooking this food for them, and that gives a little sense of team and makes the season easier for them at the same time. I think it's clearly a question of communication and clearly a question of asking them and listening to them.
Thank you so much for those answers. And so a final question is, taking a step back, what advice would you give to other countries and employers on how to open up these employment opportunities in this industry to migrant women workers. So as we mentioned at the top of this discussion, this is typically quite a male-dominated industry. So Spain is a little bit of an outlier in prioritizing women through these recruitment channels. So I guess my questions are, what lessons would you offer about how to recruit women effectively? How can you ensure that they enjoy these safe working conditions and tackle any issues that do come up during their recruitment or employment? And then, advice more generally on how to help them apply their skills and experience when they return to their country of origin. And perhaps we could start with Gladys.
Thanks, Kate. Well, migrant workers have been coming to Europe. Europe has the pull factor, of course, as they are going to other countries. If I were to give a piece of advice to any destination country that would like to order somehow these migratory flows, is of course cooperate with the countries of origin. That's a must. This is not something that can be done unilaterally, but it has to be, as I said before, it's a team job. The more the governments are engaged in this kind of programs, the better the programs are in terms of the legal framework they are being developed. Because at the end of the day, if there is a permit, a visa, and a framework that guarantees that these migrant workers, female or not female, are going to be protected, are going to enjoy their social rights, are going to be offered an integration program, and are going to be, monitored. That's the best guarantee that a government, I think, can offer. The rest is up to the private sector and to the migrant themselves. So that would be my piece of advice to any country that is interested in, setting up a program like GECO. It's just to, see where these women or workers are coming from, and just talk to that country of origin and create this legal pathway, because otherwise they will come irregularly, without a contract, without rights, without a decent salary, and that's definitely what shouldn't happen, because nobody wins. In that situation, nobody ever wins. So that will be,
Thank you, Gladys. And Sergio, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you very much. And in the line that Gladys has said, I remember that when we started the Aeneas Cartaya, the first step or stage of the project was an observers program. So we went there, we saw the selection process and how it was done, and I've been in several selection processes in Morocco. And I compare those first selections programs to the ones that I've done in 10, 12 years after, and it was really, really, really different. The profile, the people, the professional action that was there was completely different. So the evolution of the country is also there, okay, in this case of Morocco. But in the line that Gladys says, it's really important to understand deeply each actor's interest, okay, their concerns when designing the project, okay. So we need to understand which are their interests and take them in account, and also include those that are not next to the project, or even they can be in opposition to the project. So we need to understand and take them in account, okay. Really important that when we build a system like this, we train and build the trust of everyone in the system, and especially for workers. They need to understand that this is going to work. If we tell them you gain the right to return, and you will return, okay? But if there are exceptions or there are situations when those workers may stay at home for 1 year because, I don't know, they are ill, they have a personal issue, they have an accident, they cannot work, they are pregnant, those situations that were included in the law We need to tell them, trust the system. You stay at home, you have your baby, and next year you will still have your right to come. And there are many issues of women, for example, coming with 7-8 months pregnancies and having the babies in the fields, even the same day that they have been working, with the risk that this has, because that kind of information and that kind of trust was not built. Okay, the importance of the social and cultural mediator. So this is really a key. We need to have professionals that are really well trained and that believe in the project, and also covering all kind of situations. It's really important to build processes such as evaluation throughout the process. Okay, throughout the program. It's also important, and I think that it is clearly something that the Aeneas Cartaya didn't have, to evaluate employers. We evaluated workers, but we didn't ask the worker, how was your employer? Okay, yeah, we could have situations of grievances or denounces, but we never did a complete survey asking, how was your employer? How was your boss? Did they shout? Did they pay you correctly? All this information that workers could provide, the system was really important. If we had this kind of information, and growers knew that this kind of information was going to be taken, and I'm sure that most of them would be in agreement, the system would be more robust and more transparent. Okay, training, insist on the messages. I remember those days we made videos that were put in their bus when they were in their trip from Morocco to Spain. They had to get the boat and then a bus from Tarifa or Algeciras to Huelva. Those 3 hours more or less in the bus were used for watching a video explaining the conditions, explaining their rights, etc., etc. Apart, there was one person, one mediator in the bus for them, you know, but there was a lot of information providing to them. Now they have smartphones, all of them have smartphones. We can use those, you know. So there are many things that can be done and should be taken in account. And finally, be able to understand where the gaps are starting to grow. Don't just escape from them or just leave them, I will solve them. Just analyze root causes and work intensively to solve them before they are impossible to be solved, or the damage is too big, or the situation is not easy to be solved. So those are lessons learned, and also messages for someone that is building similar systems. At the end, it's really satisfactory to see thousands of people coming to Spain, working here, earning their lives, and giving a chance to their families back in Morocco. Not to talk about women empowered, that in certain moments of their lives they decide that they want to live alone, and they don't want a husband that is not the person that is necessary for them, and they just live their own life. That is something that should have been evaluated. How many of these women have been able to take that kind of decisions because they are empowered? They are the ones that earn the money, okay, and want to use the money in raising their children or just living their lives. So those are lessons learned and comments that I wanted to say.
Well, thank you so much for those very thoughtful reflections, both of you. And I will have to bring this fascinating conversation to a close here because we're running short on time. It's been a really interesting conversation, both to reflect on how these policies can evolve over time and the different roles that different actors can play in both facilitating recruitment and also ensuring that workers enjoy safe and fair working conditions while they're, during their employment period. And it's been really interesting thinking about both the specific needs of migrant women and also opportunities to link that up to programming, both before they leave and while they're staying in Spain, and then while they return to Morocco. So with that, I wanted to thank the panelists very much for your thoughtful engagement and comments. And I wanted to thank the organizers of this event.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.